Good evening. My name is NeSmith, and I'm a social studies teacher at Susan Moore High School. For this school year, I'm teaching United States history to 10th and 11th grade students. For this evening, I'd like to discuss some reading and writing literacy strategies that you can use in your social studies classroom when dealing with primary and secondary documents. As you know, with the implementation of Common Core in 2010, there was a call for greater reading and writing literacy instruction in the social studies classroom. At the time, many social studies teachers, they didn't understand the need why they had to teach reading and writing in their social studies classrooms. Many of our colleagues, they believed that reading and writing should have been taught in their English and writing classes. However, as time went by, many teachers, they understand the need to teach reading and writing in their social studies classroom, yet they lack the skills to do so. This is because many of our social studies teachers in the state of Alabama, they have their undergrad degrees in social studies or history. They don't have that reading and writing background. So for this evening, I'd like to discuss 5 strategies that you can use when dealing with primary and secondary documents. The first strategy I want to talk about is creating a summary. I think oftentimes our students, they are guilty of not reading with a purpose. We give the students a passage and they read it, yet they're reading just for the sake of reading. They are not reading to understand. I think this sometimes happens to us adults. I know I'm guilty of it at times. I may be reading my Bible and I may read a page or two and I'm like, what in the world did I just read? And this happens because I was not reading with a purpose. Here with this strategy with creating a summary, I have my students identify the who, the what, the when, the where, and the why within a passage. I start off small. I may just give them a paragraph and then work my way up to larger documents. Here's an example I used with my students at the beginning of the year. As I told you earlier, I start off small, just using a paragraph out of a textbook. The student is identifying the summary in plows and reapers, and as you're able to see, he's able to identify the who, the what, the when, the where, and the why. And afterwards, I have all my students put all that information into one sentence. And this individual, he put between 1819 and 1837, 3 men by the names of Jethro Wood, John Deere, and Cyrus McCormick created new inventions to make farming in the Midwest easier. In years past, if I would have told my students, all right, class, read the passage on plows and reapers and tell me what you got from this passage, many of the students would tell me, well, you had these men, they invented some new farm equipment. However, using the who, the what, the when, the where, and the why, you're able to get more details and provide a better thesis statement and a better summary. Once your students have mastered creating a summary, you can move on to another strategy called reciprocal reading. This is a strategy I use often in my classroom. It really calls for 4 parts, but you can scaffold it and modify it the way you need. There's 4 parts. The first part is having students identify a prediction. They're going to see a subheading or a heading or maybe even the title of a document, and they're going to make a prediction on what they think they are going to read about. The second student, they are going to be the clarifier. They are going to be clarifying any information they may not understand. They may be clarifying a word that somebody in the classroom may not know about. They will write this down. They will then clarify this. They will look it up on their device to identify what is the meaning of that word. The third student will be the one asking the questions. They'll be reading the passage as well, and they'll be identifying questions for the group to answer. They may ask, when is this happening, or what is going on here, or how does this relate to this? What facts would you select to support this argument, or what would happen if this happened? They are constantly asking questions, and as a group at the end, they will be answering these questions. And then the last part, the fourth student, or you may want to have all your students within the group work on this together, they are once again identifying the summary. They are identifying the who, the what, the when, the where, and the why. And furthermore, they'll put all that information in one sentence to provide a great summary of what they just read about. Here is a picture from the beginning of the year where my students were doing reciprocal reading. And as I said earlier, you need to make this your own. You may have to break it down, and I usually do at the beginning of the year. The first time we do this, when you have a group of 4, I may let everybody be the predictor. And then maybe the next passage, I'm going to tell everybody, all right, everybody's doing the clarification here. And then the next passage, everybody's going to be asking questions here. And then the same way with the summary. But as you go along, your students are going to understand their role. As you can see here, the top left, the individual, he is our predictor. He is making the prediction about the text. The person at the bottom left, he is our questionnaire. He is asking the questions. The person at the bottom right, They are our clarifier, and the person at the top right, I'm letting her do the reading, and then at the very end, everybody all together is going to work on the summary together. And notice some cards within the previous pictures. The cards on the left, the 4 cards are on the left. These are just little cards, clue cards students can use just to remind them what they are doing. One, it helps me with, answering questions for students. And the cards on the right is another way I use to help answer questions when using reciprocal reading. You got to understand all my students are going to be in different groups, and if every kid's hand's going up, Dr. NeSmith, I have a question here, I got a question there, I'm going to be bouncing around all over the place, and it could be crazy. But if you're ever familiar with Brazilian steakhouses, they give you a card, and this little card sits on your table, and if the card is on green, it means everything's good to go, you don't need any food. But if you flip that card over the red, it means you need something, and that's what my students use these cards for. Green lets me know every group is doing good. Red tells me that, hey, this group is having a question. I need to stop with them and see what's going on. The next strategy I want to share is CDC. This stands for Claim, Data, Commentary. Oftentimes when I ask my students to read a document, I tell them to tell me what the author is having to say and what their thoughts are. And too many times I'll be reading papers and students' thoughts will get mixed in with what the author's trying to say, and then they may sprinkle in some data, and it's just very disorganized. But through CDC, following this strategy, it gives the students a great outline on how to write their papers. It teaches students to show what the author is saying first, show what the author is claiming, then provide the data that supports what that author is saying, and then at the very end, then you can share your commentary, you can share your thoughts. And as a teacher, it makes my job a lot easier reading papers when they're like this, but it gives our students great support when writing on the ACT and other papers they'll be writing in the future. Another strategy you can use when having students reading and working with primary and secondary documents is called soapstone. This is a strategy many AP teachers throughout our state they use when working with primary and secondary documents, and it just breaks down some categories where students can identify to better understand the document. Each letter stands for something. The S is identifying the speaker. Here the students are going to learn who is telling this story. The O is the occasion. When was this written? The A is the audience. Who is this piece of literature written for? The P is the purpose. Why was this written? The S is the subject. What is being talked about? And here's a great place also to have students work on the summary, the who, the what, the when, the where, and the why. And then the last, the tone. What is the attitude of the author? The last strategy I want to talk about this evening is called 3-2-1. This one is an oldie but a goodie. You may have heard it referred to as circle, triangle, square, but this is a strategy I use when my students read contemporary issues. It also can be used when dealing with historical documents, but oftentimes I'll give my students a document. One evening I'll tell them, hey, you need to read this document before you come to class the next day, and follow the 3-2-1 strategy. And what will happen, our students are identifying 3 things that they learned about this document. Sometimes I do see students write the who, the what, the when, the where, and the why within one of these 3 things. That doesn't bother me. Then they'll identify 2 things that stood out to them about this document. And then the last thing is they'll identify 1 question that they still have regarding the document. And what happens oftentimes, students will come back to class the following day. They'll be sharing with what they have, and our discussions always begin with that 1 question they still have. So this is a very powerful strategy. So there's 5 easy strategies that you can use in your classroom if you're not familiar with teaching reading and writing in your social studies classroom. As I mentioned earlier, when this was first introduced in 2010, I was one of those teachers that did not understand why social studies teachers were having to teach reading and writing. However, over time, I do understand. And the strategies I presented on tonight, I did not develop any of these strategies. These are just strategies I've learned from over the last 10 years from teachers across the state, and they just happen to be very effective for me and my students. If you would like a PDF copy of any of the information I presented on this evening, I can certainly share that with you. Just reach out to me. My contact information is on the screen. I want to thank Alabama History Institute for allowing me the opportunity to speak this evening. Have a great night.